lights go dim. It's time to find out what's within. Behind the camera, there's so much more. With the Andy Games, let's explore. Behind the camera with Andy Games. Meet the streamers, learn their names. Off the screen, who are they? Tune in now, don't delay.
Hello everybody and welcome to Behind the Camera with Andy Games. This is the podcast where I interview people in the world of content creation and beyond with the sole purpose of getting to know the person a little bit better behind the camera. In this episode, I sat down with Professor Craig Mattson. Craig is an author and professor of communication at Calvin University with over 2 decades of experience. We discussed his published works, how communication over time has changed, especially in a teaching environment, and adapting to his role during COVID. Here is the interview. Craig, thank you so much for taking the time to appear on Behind the Camera with Andy Games. It is a pleasure to have you. How are we doing today?
I feel like I'm doing okay. I never quite know how to answer that question in like a phrase because it seems like conditions change every few seconds. But yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm pretty happy. Glad to be here.
No, I'm glad to have you. It's an interesting insight that because I feel like I know what you mean. It's like one of those questions where do you answer based on what the person asking is expecting to hear, or do you just kind of go with blunt honesty, like, which I think is something people don't do enough of sometimes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a constant decision, a constant choice. Do I say I feel a little buzzed? Do I say I'm fatigued? Do I say I'm a little overwhelmed? Or do I say I'm great?
Yeah, of course. It's one of the things, isn't it, where it almost then kind of opens the door to a completely different conversation that you might not necessarily be willing to have at that moment in time.
Right. Yep, I think so. And in digital spaces where we're constantly encountering people we barely know. And so that decision becomes, it feels like a crapshoot sometimes. Or we'll see how this goes. I'll just jump into this conversation with this person on Facebook, or this person I just joined in a Zoom meeting, or an email I just got. Okay, let's see how to adapt to this person that I don't yet know super well.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I kind of feel like this entire recording has started off in the best possible way because of yourself being a professor of communications at Calvin University. You've been teaching communications for the better part of nearly 25 years, but obviously this goes a lot further back. So what can you tell us about your passion for communications? Where did this come from? And then what sort of made you pursue this as a career following your PhD?
I hope it doesn't go a whole lot farther back than 25 years. That would sound kind of dire. But it does go back a ways. Yes. Where does it come from, though, this urge to think about and to practice and to teach and to research and write about communication? Gosh, what an obsession. I think that's, you can always talk about your parents in situations like this. So my dad was more of a math and science guy, a STEM person, and my mom was more of a language person. I certainly didn't inherit my dad's genes, definitely picked up on my mom's propensity for language. And so language, words, meaning, symbols, interaction, relationship, like all that stuff has been important to me since I was a kid. It's like I just kind of had a radar for that. And I think also I really, really enjoyed the weird relationship of a speaker and an audience. From, middle school on, I started to notice that like there's something strange happening when somebody gets up to talk to a whole bunch of people, again, that they might not know super well. And that mystery, that strangeness, and really the wonderful kind of possibilities that open in that relationship, I think kind of drew me into the study of and the a career basically in communication.
Yeah, of course. And I fully relate with what you say because my dad also comes from a STEM background, and from a young age, he always kind of like drilled in the importance of communication to me. And I kind of feel like it's one of those things where when you're exposed to that at a sort of younger age, you're more aware of it sort of in all aspects of life, because then you kind of start to think about how other people communicate, and
Yeah.
like it really does become, I mean, like an obsession, like you say. Like it's something interesting, and then with people on a stage with speaking to an audience, there's always that kind of, even on a podcast as well. Like people talk weirdly, they present themselves not weirdly. Sorry, they talk differently. They present themselves maybe weirdly, present themselves differently,
Yeah.
and it is just interesting to see how these
Hmm.
little dials kind of change up. And
Yeah.
I guess you could say, in a way, people are putting on their customer voice, customer service voice.
Yeah. Yes, I don't mind your word weird. I think it could be a way to denigrate somebody. You're weird, but it could also be just the sort of
Yeah.
amazingness of people. And I don't know if we encounter that amazingness of humans in any way more vividly than we do when we try to communicate. It can also be very frustrating,
Yeah.
but it can be really life-giving as well. There's a pair of communication theorists that have been pretty important to me. Pierce and Cronin is their last names, and they talk about the stories we live and the stories we tell.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of gets at that sort of stereophonic experience that you're describing of like, we're just trying to do a thing here, but then we're also like talking about the thing and we're forming relationships in the middle of the thing. And so, yeah, I feel like it just gives you a lot to pay attention to.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. And obviously, with your profession in communications, there's come a lot of publications, a lot of books you've wrote. What can you tell us about from your first book going forward? Um, and obviously, being a college professor, I'm sure there is like a somewhat of a crossover between the two. Do you kind of feel like you have to kind of update your books based on the changes in communication, changes in sort of, say,
Hmm.
dialects and the language people speak, even though like you and I would both speak English, but obviously that
Mhm.
language changes on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I wish I could say there'd been a master plan, from the start. Here's what I want to explore in my career. No, I didn't know what I was doing. Um, I started down the path that I feel like I'm on right now. Some days, sometimes I fall off the path too. But yeah, when a student raised her hand in a class and said, "Have you ever heard of Bono's cause-related marketing campaign called Product Red?" That was in 2007. The campaign had just come out the year earlier, and it was intended to help like major brands like Apple and Converse and Microsoft to, you know, apportion some of their profits to the Global Fund in support of relief for AIDS victims in sub-Saharan Africa. And so, yeah, I started to study like what happens when corporations try to do good in the world. And then I kind of moved into a sort of in my next book, I moved into a sort of smaller arena, which is like what happens when social enterprises attempt to do good in the world, and what role does communication play in all that? What role does spirituality play in all that? And then most recently, I've been writing about kind of not the organizational experience of leaders, which I'd mostly focused on up to that point, but the organizational experience of ordinary workers, just those people who are coming, showing up every day. And I interviewed a whole bunch of Gen Z and millennial professionals, thinking that they might have a better sense of like what's going on in this organization, because they, I don't know, they sometimes inhabit a more fragile place in the organization. Maybe they were just hired. And so that forces them to be super alert to the dynamics of the org. So I think all along, without really knowing it, I was interested in what is communication doing in organizations, and then what kind of impact does that have on the worlds around us?
Mhm. Yeah, I was quite interested that you mentioned that, especially with the millennial Gen Z professions, because I can tell you from my personal point of view, that is, I fit into that bill. And there is no sort of real teachings on communication in that kind of unskilled
Mm,
professional world, because
mm,
it is a case now where people get hired into these jobs off the street, and you can kind of tell sometimes there are a lot of people who've never worked in an office before, and whether it be people coming up from graduating university, or whether they've just wanted a change of pace, they wanted a change of career, but they've obviously been sort of had a different structure in terms of how they communicate with other people in their other lines of work. And per industry, it's an entirely different thing. Like when you go into the corporate world, they kind of want everybody singing off the same hymn sheet, as it were, but they do not give you that hymn sheet to be singing off. You kind of have to just piece it together, and it's a very strange kind of place to be in. It's one of them things where I suppose it's like a lot of things where you just pick it up as you go along, and it's the same with being in the digital age. Everything changes. Like the generations below keep inventing these new types of ways to communicate, and it's hard to keep up with.
Yeah, it sure is. It's hard for everybody to keep up with. And if it were only Gen Zs inventing new ways to communicate, that would be awesome, actually. Gen Zs are amazing people, but it's the tech bros, frankly. It's the dudes with the hoodies in places like Silicon Valley that invent this technology that, maybe we want and maybe we don't, but we just have to deal with it. It's showing up. And so I sometimes wish that we had a bit more say in what tech shows up in the world, and that if we could think a bit more with the designers of the technology about what our goals are and what we're actually hoping to do, I feel like our workplaces would be a tad bit more manageable. And those codes you mentioned, that's always been there in organizations. Unspoken rules, right? Around here, here's how we do things, and you just you transgress those immutable laws. But on the other hand, the digital creates this kind of jankiness in those rules, and suddenly we're in a situation where I was talking with a Gen Z guy the other day who said that Microsoft Teams has really shifted the communicational dynamics of his organization, because he can directly message anyone in the org, however high they are up on the corporate ladder. And that puts him in a place of feeling like, I have never been introduced to this vice president. How should I address them?
Yep.
And the vice president, on the other hand, might be feeling like, I think maybe you should be sending this to my administrative assistant. And so we're all kind of wondering, like, what are the rules? What are the norms? What are the expectations here? What's good manners in this particular situation?
Absolutely. And speaking of unspoken rules, that is pretty much one of them in those types of settings where, particularly in my line of work, it's if you're on Microsoft Teams, don't message anybody who's like an SVP or above, senior vice president or above. It's like, and it's such to me, it creates like a huge communication breakdown, because it's kind of like, well, these are just people too. They are in the same line of work. Why is what I have to say not worth their time, for example? It's I don't understand it. There obviously has to be a reason, but like it couldn't be more true, where you have access to talk to basically anybody. And this goes further than just like Microsoft Teams in a work setting. This is like on a global scale with like the digital age that we're in. But there are so many, as we say, unspoken rules of, okay, you have this tool to openly communicate, but you can't do this, you can't do that. And the lines kind of get a little bit blurred with that.
Yeah. I think you put your finger on an important dynamic there. That's a place where I guess, one remedy for it is just greater transparency.
Yeah.
I think maybe asking about the rules might be a way to go with that. Just asking about people's expectations. So I just messaged you, Ms. SVP. I don't know the norms in this company. Is that okay? Would you prefer to receive this by email? Like a line before your question along those lines might sort of soften the blow of your DM in that particular moment. But I think the SVP might also appreciate, like, hey, this is a company where I can I can hear from people at every level. And so I get some intel that I need to understand the context of our working community. And so like I think a flexible and wise SVP might appreciate that in their sort of best moments.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that's missing from like the corporate world is transparency, because there almost seems to be like this fear instilled in uh lower levels within companies where it's like, okay, you're down here, the rest of us are up here kind of thing. And like communication is an absolute issue. Like it is such an issue. And it's one of those things that is at its core one of the most important things that as people we can have, because human beings being the most intelligent species, they kind of almost go against that sometimes with the way that they communicate or don't communicate with one another. Like it's kind of insane. And on the topic of the digital age, communication is now opened up on a global scale. Like anybody can reach out to anybody, like how we ended up coming together to record this podcast. And do you kind of feel that in your history of communications that you've seen the changes, especially with like the students you teach, as a sort of product of the digital age?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think so. It's strange to think that when I started teaching, email barely existed. I think when I got my first like sort of big person's job, I had to go into the office to check my email, and it was just not a thing anywhere else in my life, which is very strange to think about. Now it seems like email's on the inside of my glasses. So that's a thing. And so I remember trying to figure out how to communicate with my students at the right cadence, because a student came up to me and said, "Hey, you're sending us a lot of emails." And I realized, oh yeah, like I can't just send an email every time I think of something. So I was clearly like bumbling around trying to figure that out, but so were they, right? They were trying to figure out what is an appropriate response time. I think I remember the first time as a student being chastised for not responding to a communication from a staff member and feeling sort of shocked by that, like realizing, oh, there's this extra layer of responsibility I have to pay attention to stuff in my digital life. And I think I must have been like 21 or something at the time. But yeah, I think that has shifted multiple times. We kind of, in some ways, email has become a part of students' life. There are some people who are resistant to it. They're kind of an abyss. You just send emails into their inbox. But yeah, I think one thing I've noticed is that with the arrival of texting, which is a kind of finger talking,
Yeah.
finger speech, as the linguist McWhorter has noted, email has been affected by that too. So people sometimes treat emails a bit more like finger talking, and so they kind of rush off a two-liner. And then I had a colleague the other day saying that she remembered one day she got, I don't know, more than 100 communications from a single person, like 183 or something crazy like that, emails from one person who was clearly just treating it like a direct messaging device.
Yeah.
And so I think that set of shifting is strange. A lot of us have international students in our learning communities, and AI has been a real boon, I think, for international students, because they can, even if they don't feel 100% sure about how to compose an email in a second language or maybe a third or fourth language, AI can help them do that in a way that their monolingual professor can actually decode and work with. So AI is also doing stuff to our student teacher interactions. Sometimes good and sometimes not so awesome.
Yeah, like AI is certainly one of those things where I think it's always going to be a work in progress, because I personally I
Hmm.
think it simply has to be, because
Hmm.
the moment that it's not is whenever it takes over um any signs of productivity that people can have, takes away like creativity, even sort of how to communicate. Because the good thing
Hmm.
about it is that it's not everybody can articulate sentences, they kind of articulate sort of words the best. So obviously it's a good tool for helping in terms of that. They want to get their thoughts out, but they can't really write it down in the best way possible. And then, of course, there's people's experience. Not everybody is sent an email because everything is texting these days. Like, it's kind of funny how we've gone from the one of the best ways to talk to people was email, and then it went to texting. Now emails kind of sort of shift them back in because they're now more working professionals, and all of a sudden people are kind of having to like relearn how to communicate in certain ways. And it's certainly interesting how different formats take on how you communicate. Like, you communicate differently in text, like shortened language, acronyms, and then email. It's sort of, so how many times have you seen an email come through where you read it and just thought that's a text message? That's like, all these kind of words you might not recognize, all these acronyms. Just
Yes. Yeah, I think so. In my book, I lay out 6 different modes of communication, and the first one that I talk about is sending things as a mode. Just like, that's what I do. I send stuff, and definitely email is our principal way to send stuff, launch stuff, scatter stuff, whatever. But I think in all of the modes that I discuss, there's got to be this moment where you sort of step back before you press send and you think about, what can this mode do? Like, what can an email do? What is it capable of? And what is it just not capable of? I think sometimes, I haven't really thought to put it this way, but I think sometimes I've like tried to Tony Stark an email. Do you remember that scene in the first Iron Man movie where he's like pushing his suit as far as it can go up to the moon,
Yep.
and it gets encased in ice, and he falls to earth. And I think sometimes we push our modes as far as we can take them, and they stop being what they are, and they stop being capable of doing what we're hoping for. So stepping back and just saying, yeah, what can a text message do? What could a DM do? And then, like, what should I be doing? And what should this email do? I think that moment of pause can really, really make a difference in how well you navigate any particular communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Because something that people have said to me before, and they they say this is one of the most rare things that they've ever encountered, is when it comes to speaking to people, whether it be an email or text or any form of electronic chat, I will send messages how I will talk in real life. And people are kind of a bit taken aback and shocked by that, because it's just not normal, because that's in essence not what these platforms are really to be used for. They're used to sort of get a quick message across.
Yeah.
But I always, my sort of personal principle on it is, I'm going to send a message out to somebody, I would want to sort of send it in the way that, one, that makes it kind of real, that it's coming from me in terms of this is how I talk, but also how I would like people to communicate to me as well, if it was good the other way around. Which, I mean, being in a finance role in my job is, I mean, 1 out of 10 times you're talking, because I could send this big long email that kind of details everything out, and I'll just get a 2-word response back from like a VP somewhere. I'm like, all right, cool. But it is like such an interesting thing. So based off of that, like, whenever, let's say it's a new semester, you have a brand new class in of first year university students, what would the first thing regarding communication be that you teach to a class?
I think this is probably applicable in the workplace as well, but I think I'm really trying to push back on seeing the classroom as essentially a one-on-one relationship. So students come in, they feel a little alienated.
Yeah.
They might not know anybody around them, and they might be used to being in classes where you don't know your peers' names. And so really the only person you know in the room is the professor, the person up front. And I really work against that. I don't want this class to be just a dialogue between you and me. I want this to be a multi-log, a conversation that's going in multiple directions. And so I really try quickly to not only get people's voice into the room, but to get them talking and hearing each other, talking to and hearing from each other. So that's probably one of the first things that I work on in terms of communication. And I think that a similar thing has to happen in the workplace. My book is about digital communication in the workplace. And I think there is a tendency to like reduce everything to a one-on-one somehow. And not only does that fill up your calendar, but it also it doesn't really help you to get a feel for what's actually happening relationally in working community if you're just having a series of one-on-ones. So trying to recognize the actual complexity and of the interaction in a company, it's actually, I think, rather like what's going on in a classroom, ideally. So one more thing, that there's a social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt, who talks about what he calls a hive switch. And that's when you shift from, I think he says like humans are like 90% chimp and 10% bee. And it's hard for us to like operate like bees in any space. We tend to just kind of be like a chimp, looking for a banana or whatever. But to recognize that, oh, I'm a part of something larger than myself, I'm a part of a hive, is a real switch that I'm often trying to activate with anyone I'm working with.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, that, because I like the fact that that breaks down any stigma and any kind of awkwardness that students may have with one another, and even people in workplaces, as we say, because I can tell you firsthand that in my work at the moment, I'm in a project of about 140 people. And it's one of those things where we're told, yeah, we're told, okay, these are the people to reach out to for XYZ, etc., etc. And this kind of goes across the project, different people, different teams. And but it's one of those things where, because we're not introduced to them, we have to like maybe look them up in the directory or on Microsoft Teams just to see who this person is. It could be the person sitting next to me. I wouldn't have a clue. But and even as well, for me, it takes me back to whenever I was in university. Like, I think from my graduating class, I could probably count on one hand the amount of names that I actually knew of people, because it was that very much kind of one-on-one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, people were encouraged, but it was never sort of strictly told. And as you may know, uni students, they kind of they wait to be told sometimes. And I like that approach, because I know
Yeah.
for me, because like I didn't, if I don't know somebody and I kind of only know them from being in a class with them, you don't know how to really approach people sometimes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it can be quite difficult. It's
Mm-hmm.
very easy to just go in somewhere where you don't know anybody and kind of stay that way for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So I have to say, I really, really do like that. I wish I had that approach 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it may
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a yearning for relationship that's just pretty basic to being a human. We're hypersocial creatures, and so it's a bummer when we can't enjoy that sociality, when we can't really move into those relationships. And in the workplace, it makes for some sad workers, frankly.
Oh,
It
yeah.
makes for now, I mean, I got to counter this. I had a guy read my book and say, sometimes I just want to do my job. I
Yeah.
don't need to be besties with my coworkers. And I get that. I respect that. So I wouldn't say that we've got to somehow confuse, our workers with our best friends. But I think that treating people like relational creatures,
Yeah.
like people who do have desires for some level of connection, whatever's appropriate in the moment, is just a more honest and empathetic way of being a person at work or in the classroom, like you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, of course. Like, for some people, of course, there has to be that line where it's like, you are my colleague, you are my peer. We will get on between the hours of 9 to 5. But that's kind of where it goes. Obviously, that can change. I mean, the friendships, relationships are forged in the same kind of
Yeah.
way. It just depends on where people want to sort of draw their lines, because the fact is, there are a lot of sad workers for that exact reason, because they feel like they can't reach out to people. They feel like they're kind of in their own bubble. They kind of feel like if
Mhm.
Maybe it's just a finance thing. I don't know. Maybe I've been in finance for far too long, and it's kind of.
Well, your career seems fine to me. It's just the challenge of like, how do you be a person in that line
Yeah,
of work?
yeah, that's it. And I think that's like an important sort of. It's an important question to ask because not everybody kind of acts like that. People like sometimes act like their role rather than a person in this role, and I kind of feel like it's an
Mm,
important distinction
I
that
like that.
sometimes people don't make.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that there you're showing that kind of complex attention again of here's a thing I need to do, but we also need to be, co-workers while we're doing this thing. Um, and to be fair, it is often hard to figure out how your role relates to your identity. It's always tricky for humans. You kind of wear it like a glove or something, and you put it on, and it doesn't feel quite natural to you, but like you can do a lot of things with it. And it seems to me, I mean, I struggle with this as a professor. There are elements of a student and teacher interaction that are, I mean, they can be awfully like a friendship. But at the end of the day, there are power dynamics at work there that I really have to like keep my eye on. I think I'm stating sort of obvious things, but I think managers feel that too. How do I inhabit this role for the good of the people around me? I have a really quick story. A guy I interviewed during the pandemic, and he his company was a is a digital design company. So they design software that helps companies to do whatever they do, but better. And they were losing a lot of money because it was 2020. And his workers, his team, yeah, I think he had maybe 40 employees in his company. They were pretty discouraged. And his tendency when he sees discouraged people is to move towards that pain and say, like, how can I help you? And to show empathy and compassion. He's a former pastor, so like those were his instincts. But he's riding the elevator up to his floor and thinking about those people and their discouragement, and he decided to shift roles, I think, or to shift his habit and his role a bit. And instead of sitting down next to people and showing empathy and compassion, he asked a very kind of leader of the company's kind of question of like, how can our company be more generous in this moment? How can we give? And that generated some work that everybody sort of got on board with.
Yeah,
And it was energizing, it was animating, and it pulled in clients. And so I think in that moment, his role and his like personal tendencies were a little bit in tension. Like his personal tendency would be to put an arm around one of his coworkers and say, "You're going to be okay." But instead, he let his role as the president of the company sort of lead. And he's like, yeah, let me ask a different question here.
yeah,
Not how can I offer you consolation, but how can we be a more generous company? And there, I think that was a really smart, wise negotiation of your role and your
yeah.
identity. Does that make sense to you, Andy?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like it sort of strikes the sort of fine balance between, yes, I'm the president of this company, but I'm also a person like the people working underneath me. And at the end of the day, like everybody's in it together. Like to throw out that kind of old cliche, like everybody is in, especially if a company's losing money, everyone has to band together in whatever way they possibly can. Like, it doesn't matter if you're president, director, or if you're just at the sort of lowest ranking member of a team. Like, that's
Yeah.
where it kind of does come into it, where everyone's in it together. So you kind of have to sort of show humanity in some ways like that. So no, I love that. That's a great story.
Hmm.
Speaking of the pandemic as well, then how did you find the differences from going to classroom based teaching to, I'm assuming there was an element of remote teaching for maybe the better part of 18 months?
Hmm.
How did you find the difference in terms of that, especially in terms of
Yeah.
communicating with your students?
Yes. Oh my gosh. In some ways, a chasm opened between me and my students. I really had no idea what was going on with them because my university decided we were all trying out stuff, right? We were just experimenting. And so I think we started with like largely asynchronous learning. So, just like creating modules for the students to kind of work through, maybe with recorded lectures or podcasts or something. And wow, I just felt like I had no clue as to what was going on with my students. And I guess I just enjoyed it as a break from being, the sort of intense relationality of being a professor. But I started to miss it. And I think I had a student say, hey, could we have a synchronous meeting? And so, yeah, I created a synchronous meeting. No, I don't think I'd ever done that before with so many people. And it went terribly. It was awful. Most people didn't turn their cameras on. So there were, again, it was this kind of thing where we weren't sure what the rules were. We weren't sure what the norms were. And I wasn't even too sure how to run the tech in many ways. And so, yeah, I think those are a couple of stories from my early time in COVID. And again, those experiences were mirrored in the workplace. Back to the isolation and sadness you were describing, like we all felt that pretty intensely in 2020 and 2021 especially. So yeah, I think that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, of course. And I'm sure, as you say, like it was a nice break from sort of just the intensity of kind of a student teacher
Yeah.
sort of
In a way.
yeah, of course. But then at the same time, if you're doing pre-recorded lectures, podcasts, a lot of digital media for your students, like that takes away from your core teachings of communication, because that you're not able to actually communicate with them. So like, and that's the thing as well with it being everything digital. Not everyone's going to put their camera on, and this even extends the workplace as well. You have a meeting of like 5 people, for example, and you're the only one with your camera on. You can't deliver what you're trying to, or you can't communicate in the best way possible, because half of the half of the communication side is gone, because you're not able to read the person's body language. You're not able to sort of gauge their responses properly. It's just usually just the click of the button to go off mute to be like, yes, I get what you're saying, and then back to mute kind of thing. And all sorts of things that people would never get away with in in a real life setting,
I'm going to sit out in the hall. Is that okay? For this meeting.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, I mean, the amount of people who've admitted to me before, whenever they work remotely, that they will lie in bed all day with their laptop on and in bed. And it's kind of okay, that sounds great for like maybe a day. But at the same time, it's like kind of, I mean, I'm very much kind of on the fence between in person and remote. I think there needs to be a fine balance, because I think you need to be around people. You need to be around people, because I spent the first 6 months in my current job remote. Whenever it came to me actually going into the office for the first time and meeting all of my colleagues for the first time, it was like I hadn't been outside in years, because I had just and like I'd met so many people remotely, and it was almost as if I was kind of like, I'm meeting these people in person for the first time. Do I just go in and like get on as if I've known them for the last 6 months, which I kind of have, but I don't know. It's been on it kind of creates snowballs, and it's like it's just a weird like web of anxiety in the end of the day.
I was just reading this book that was published in 2019. So before all this stuff, in some ways, it was before all this stuff. And the book is called Always On. It's by Angela Williams Gorel. It's a great book. But Gorel talks about hybridity as a kind of function of digital communication. And at that time, we weren't using that term very much. We weren't saying like, we have hybrid work arrangements like we do today. At least that's a thing in the US. Do you guys use the same phrase? Like we're working in like our company's hybrid?
Yeah, we would say hybrid.
Yeah. So hybrid work arrangements. But reading that book from 2019 reminded me like, oh yeah, like in a certain sense, things have always been hybrid. Like we're always relating to people at a remove. It might be through email, it might be through texting, it might be through even farther back through letters. There's always been something mediating our relationships at work. But in the last, the early 2020s, it intensified and accelerated, and it was a lot to process for our species. We're just like taking all this in, like, how do we do this when it is this intense? Which is why one of the chapters in my book is about just navigating a Zoom room. Like,
Yeah.
what are ways to kind of keep your spirits up and keep your soul intact when you're staring into your webcam all day, it seems like.
Yeah, it was one of those things where for the first maybe 3 to 4 weeks, it was so new to everybody, like the idea of working remotely. And I think to a lot of people, it was a break, like we touched on before. I know for me personally, it was was no longer getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to be at the gym for 6, to then be at work for 7:30, to then
Right.
get
Right.
home for 7 o'clock at night or whatever it might have been. I was rolling out of bed at 5 to 9 and logging into work, and I was still talking to the same people who I'd seen the week before. And then it just kind of went on. But then, because everyone was stuck at home, naturally, you kind of just are at the point where, I mean, I still lived at home during COVID. I still lived with my parents, and it got to the point I was like, these are the only people I see. I haven't seen my friends. I haven't been able to make new relationships or anything like that. I think people just sort of, the sanity levels just kind of changed for people. I think people were kind of yearning to get back, and I think it's the same now with hybrid working, where people are more willing to go into an office now than they were, because I mean, I'm the same as well. Like, as much as I love remote working, it's so easy to get cooped up. You're not having real, genuine conversations with people. You're just kind of there. You're still at your desk. You may speak to different people, but you're still at your desk, and you don't move. Your setting doesn't change. The people you chat to does, but your setting is still the same, and that you need that kind of something to keep things fresh. I would say. Yes.
Yeah, I have really enjoyed this conversation. It's had a leisure to it, but there's been a lot of like connection making, and I've really appreciated the kind of spontaneity of the conversation. Thanks for that, Andy.
No, I appreciate that, Craig. Yeah, that's definitely what I try to do with these conversations, because it's all well and good being like question answer, but that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, and that's what all this is about. Is just allowing people to share their story, share experiences, and just have a good time doing it in the most informal, free flowing possible way. So, Craig, it has been a pleasure having you on Behind the Camera with Andy Games. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any sort of final thoughts for the listeners, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I would love for people to take a look at my book, Digital Overwhelm. It's available on a lot of bookstores, but Amazon might be the easiest place to find it. And if buying a book right now doesn't sound awesome, I do write a weekly newsletter about this sort of thing, and it's called The Mode Switch. So if you just look at the website, themodeswitch.com, you'll see an easy way to sign up for that regular newsletter on work culture.
Incredible. And the links for everything will be in the episode notes on the podcast as well, which you can find on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Apple, everywhere you can find podcasts, basically. But yes, once again, Craig, thank you so much for taking the time. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Keep doing good work, Andy.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And there you have it. That was my conversation with Professor Craig Mattson. Something I particularly enjoyed about this chat was hearing Craig's perspective on communication and his experiences surrounding this. I think this is an incredibly important topic, particularly with how things change as time goes on, and you can really tell that Craig is just a master of his craft. Once again, I would like to thank Craig Mattson for taking the time to appear on Behind the Camera. As always, this has been Behind the Camera with Andy Games. I've been your host, Andy Games. If you enjoyed what you heard today, any and all likes, comments, subscriptions, follows, and reviews are all hugely appreciated and do go a long, long way. We will be back soon with another installment of Behind the Camera with Andy Games, but until then, peace.